It was a typical Tuesday morning when Caleb walked into his classroom, noticeably late again. Mr. Thompson, known for his strict punctuality, paused his lesson and faced him with an unexpected question, one that seemed oddly personal and out of context for the math class they were in. His response not only silenced the room but also left everyone, including Mr. Thompson, visibly offended. The whole class was watching the confrontation between their teacher, Mr. Thompson, and Caleb in complete silence. They knew their teacher as nothing but a very nice and considerate man, but it was clear that Caleb had simply pushed him too far with his clear lack of respect for the rules and his consistent late arrivals. When Caleb entered the classroom nearly 20 minutes late, which was a new record even for him, Mr. Thompson was clearly annoyed and stopped in the middle of his explanation. Caleb and Mr. Thompson were locked in a stare down after that for what felt like hours. Classmates who knew Caleb a bit knew that he would not take kindly to a remark like this, and they were very right. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Caleb's best friend Jason was also in the class at the time this all went down. Caleb always told him that he wanted nothing more than to follow in his mother's footsteps. What you haven't Tabri? His mom had built up a tech support company from the ground up, and it was always the plan that Caleb would succeed her as director when he was old enough and ready. But for that, he needed a good education to prepare him, as the job was anything but easy. Jason was not going to stop until he had found out the truth. And after not even too much digging, Jason found out what Caleb had been hiding from the world. And this revelation only made Mr. Thompson's comment more hurtful. About a month ago, Caleb's parents had split up. Caleb had spent his whole life idolizing his mother and wanting to be like her. But it turned out that his mother had been cheating on his poor father for years. Jason also found out that Caleb was actually the one who found out about his mother's infidelity. He had come to visit her at work as a surprise one day and walked in on his mother getting it on with one of her secretaries in her office. That encounter must have broken him completely, as he then had to be the one to bring the news to his father as well. Jason had spoken to Caleb about it after his discovery, and Caleb had confirmed all this to the true. He even added that his mother wanted to buy his silence and even blackmailed him to prevent him from telling his father the truth. But Caleb had not cared and not hesitated about exposing the truth. And from that moment on, his perfect family was destroyed, and he never wanted to see his mother again. Silence clung to the classroom, thick and suffocating. Jason watched, his stomach churning, as Caleb clenched his fists, his jaw tight. Then it happened. Caleb's voice cracked the silence like a bat hitting a ball. "How dare you?" he yelled, his voice echoing off the walls. His words were sharp, fast, like he was spitting out poison. Jason couldn't bear it. His friend's pain was too raw, too real. He cringed as Caleb's shouts grew louder, his words slicing through the tense air. Needing air, Jason bolted. He pushed through the classroom door and stumbled into the hallway. He breathed in deeply, seeking calm in the quiet. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Everyone knew Caleb was in for it. After his fiery outburst, there was no way Mr. Thompson or the school could just let it slide. But somewhere, deep down, Jason hoped this explosion of raw emotion might be a turning point for Caleb. Maybe getting all that anger and hurt out in front of everyone could be the start of healing. Well, the quiet was dense, almost suffocating. Jason scanned the room, catching the eyes of his classmates. Anger, confusion, irritation, it was all there, painted clear as day on their faces. Jason approached a group huddled near the windows. "What happened after I left?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. The response was a mixture of shrugs and half-hearted explanations, nothing concrete. "Why do you even hang out with him?" one of them asked, her tone more accusing than curious. And they called Caleb thoughtless, a disruption. Jason felt a twinge of defense rise inside him, but the room's mood was too charged to argue. It was clear they saw Caleb as nothing but a troublemaker. Jason shuffled from one group to another, his questions bouncing back unanswered. "Why the sudden hate for Caleb?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion and a hint of frustration. Just then, Mr. Thompson re-entered the room, his presence commanding immediate silence. His voice was stern, resolute. "We will not discuss Caleb's reaction further," he announced firmly. As whispers died down, Jason leaned against his desk, regret gnawing at him. He hadn't expected his exit would lead to such a spiral. Jason replayed the scene over and over in his head. Should he have intervened? Jason knew what was coming next. Caleb was probably sitting in the principal's office right now, the weight of his outburst being measured and judged. As the bell rang, dismissing them, Jason felt a pull, a need to do something, to not just stand by. Driven by a mix of concern and curiosity, Jason left the classroom and made his way to the principal's office. Jason reached the office and paused, his eyes drawn to the window. Inside, he saw Caleb and Mr. Thompson, their figures cast in the soft light of the office. Deciding not to interrupt, Jason stepped back and leaned against the opposite wall. 10 minutes crawled by, and the door remained closed. It wasn't Caleb who came out though. Instead, someone else entered a quick exchange of nods with Mr. Thompson before disappearing inside. Jason approached Caleb's father as he stepped out of the office. "Mr. Adams, what's happening?" he asked gently. The question seemed to break something in the man. His eyes immediately filled with tears and his voice trembled as he tried to speak. "All I know is that I have to take Caleb home. He was expelled," Mr. Adams managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Jason's mind raced. Expelled? That was extreme. The school hardly ever took such drastic measures. Jason stood, stunned. Expulsion was unheard of here. From his vantage point, Jason watched as Mr. Adams re-entered the office. Through the slightly ajar door, he could hear the man's voice, strained and repetitive, apologizing over and over. "I'm so sorry. We'll handle it at home. Thank you for your understanding." The words echoed down the hallway, each apology seeming to take a piece of Mr. As Caleb walked past, Jason caught up to him briefly. "Hey, what happened, man?" he asked, keeping his tone light but concerned. Caleb paused, his face serious. "I deserved this." "Jason," he admitted, his voice steady, "but I don't regret what I did." The final bell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. Students quickly gathered their things, the atmosphere charged with whispers and hurried footsteps. Jason watched as everyone left, the classroom emptying around him. He felt adrift, surrounded by unanswered questions and a deepening sense of isolation. Jason reflected on Mr. Thompson's demand for silence. As much as Jason wanted to understand everything, he knew he had to respect that boundary just as he would expect others to respect his. Later at home, Jason pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Caleb, hoping for some direct answers. Almost immediately, his phone buzzed with a reply. It was from Caleb's dad. "Caleb can't use his phone for at least a week," the message read. Jason stared at the screen, frustration mounting. Caleb's punishment was severe: no phone, no visitors, no conversations with anyone outside his family. It was a tough lesson enforced by the walls of his room and the quiet of his house. After hitting a dead end with Caleb, Jason realized that the only person who might shed some light on the whole situation was Mr. Thompson. Luckily, Jason knew where Mr. Thompson lived. As Jason approached the house, he noticed the unkempt garden and peeling paint. It seemed as though no one had tended to the house since his last visit for Mrs. Thompson's wake. Looking around, Jason could see clear signs of abandonment in every corner of the property. It was as if the house itself was grieving, left to weather the storm of loss without care. Jason knocked hesitantly on the weathered wood of the front door. After a long, uneasy wait, the door slowly creaked open. Mr. Thompson stood there, visibly surprised to see one of his students on his doorstep. He could see the hesitation in his teacher's eyes, the vulnerability. It was clear Mr. Thompson had been crying, the traces of sorrow fresh on his face. Jason cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Kay came to talk about Caleb. He began cautiously. At Caleb's name, Mr. Thompson's face tightened, a flash of annoyance crossing his features. Jason sensed Mr. Thompson's reluctance but continued. "I think it's important to understand why Caleb acted the way he did." Slowly, Mr. Thompson nodded, allowing Jason to proceed. With Mr. Thompson's cautious permission, Jason began to unravel the story of Caleb's family troubles. He spoke of the infidelity, the emotional turmoil, and the impact it had on Caleb. Finally, Mr. Thompson spoke. "This explains a lot," he admitted, his voice low and reflective. "What did Caleb say?" "Exactly," he asked, needing to understand the full scope of the incident. During his outburst, Caleb said, "You are lucky your wife is dead so she can't cheat on you." Mr. Thompson's voice was steady, but the pain behind those words was palpable. He paused, struggling with the memory. "Those words cut deep, Jason. They shocked everyone in the room," he continued, his tone a mix of sadness and disbelief. So Mr. Thompson looked away, his eyes glistening. "I cried right there in front of the class," he confessed. The impact of Caleb's words had resonated beyond just Mr. Thompson. The next morning, the school was abuzz with the news that Caleb would be returning. Mr. Thompson had spoken to the principal, explaining the new insights into Caleb's behavior. Arrangements were made swiftly, and Caleb was given a second chance. Caleb's return was met with a mixed response initially, but as the day progressed, a sense of normalcy began to return. Mr. Thompson facilitated a discussion about understanding and compassion, which helped bridge the gap between Caleb and his classmates. By the end of the day, the class had rallied around him, accepting him back into their fold. With his story out in the open, Caleb felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The understanding from his classmates and teachers provided a support system he hadn't realized he needed. His school behavior began to improve gradually. He was more engaged, punctual, and his grades started to reflect his renewed focus. It was as if sharing his burden had opened the door to a fresh start and a path to healing.